Hello everybody, and welcome back once again to yet another addition to my journey through One Piece. As you can tell by the sparse but notable holiday decorations, I'm recording this during the holiday season. So regardless of whether you celebrate it or not, I just thank you for watching these videos and consistently checking them out, and I just hope you have a great holiday season. A healthy and happy holiday season, whether you celebrate it or not. But to the topic at hand, this is perhaps the most awaited, for me personally, maybe some of you, but definitely me, One Piece video, because today we're going to be talking about Wano. This is part one of multiple. I don't know if there will be 3, 2, 4, but there will be at least 2, and this is the first part. I don't know exactly how long Wano is, I just know that it's long. So this will be covering chapters 910 to 958. I'm currently, at the moment, going through the Odin-Roger flashback, which is just a little bit past that. So, yeah, we're going to be stopping at 958 for this video. But it really feels like a watershed moment for me. Very personally gratifying to just reach this point, let alone read it. I'll get into what I think of the content in just a little bit, but it just means a lot to me because when I first started this journey, when I first started streaming this, Wano was releasing, so people were talking about, generally, not spoiling, but just like, oh, the latest episode or the latest chapter of Wano was really great, I can't wait to see when you get to Wano, and people were talking about it, and it was the current One Piece stuff, whereas I was at Arlong Park or something. So I always thought of it as, not that I'd never get to it, but that I get to it eventually. And if you continuously in your mind think of something as beyond the horizon, consistently, whether I was at Romance Dawn, or Arlong Park, or Alabasta, or Skypiea, or Water 7, or Marineford, even post-timeskip, I just kept thinking of Wano as, we'll get there eventually. We are here. This is not eventually. This is not over the horizon. Wano is here. So it feels kind of surreal. But outside of the less important personal build-up for Wano, in-universe it's been built up for ages. Now in terms of the actual plot, we had a lot of hints about what this could be about, what it could pertain to, especially building up from Zou. In terms of the plot, in terms of what it means for the Kozuki clan, for Momo, for Odin, the culture of Wano and the state of society in the present, Kaido. Zou, I think, was a big building block for Wano. But the thematic bits of this, the thematic foundation, which I think will be essential to this, was laid so far back. And I started talking about it in these videos. I started talking about the idea of Luffy being this sun, representing this sun, this dawn. Skypiea at the, or Jaya, Skypiea Jaya, around there, is when I started really noticing that that was what he represented, outside of like one-off panels or what he means to others, in terms of being a sun in more minor scenes and more minor ways. Skypiea was where I first sort of clocked that on a grand thematic level, that is what Luffy is. And the more and more the story goes on, that's just strengthened. Into Fishman Island with the Joy Boy stuff, Dressrosa, even in a way Alabasta before Skypiea, but anyways, I digress. As the story's gone on, Luffy has become more and more of this sun. The hints of Joy Boy have strengthened that. And Wano just keeps talking about this fated person to come and end the long night. Pedro talked about it. I think in the flashbacks has been talked about as well, which we won't talk about much today. That'll be next video. But there is this fated person to come, very similar to Fishman Island. Very, echoes of Joy Boy. Kaido is representative of the long night. What he has done to Wano is unbelievable. Unbelievably cruel, rather. And so that night has to end. And I think Luffy has to do it. And the moment when it happens will be so gratifying. The chapter or sequence of chapters, whatever it may be, I just can't wait. And it seems to be building up to that. I've been thinking since Zou that Wano is the one for all this imagery and symbolism and themes to come to a head. And that's only strengthened as I've experienced more of Wano. But yeah, in plot terms, Wano has been built upon since Zou, maybe some bits before that as well. Of course, we have Momo and Kinemon and Kanjuro all joining in Dressrosa, and the former two in Punk Hazard. So I guess Wano's been building up since Punk Hazard, since they joined, but really prominently in Zou. Zou's the big one. But thematically, far before that, I still maintain that Jaya and Skypiea lays the foundations for a bunch of Wano stuff. And that's just beautiful to see. That is something that can only happen in a story like One Piece. And are there any stories like One Piece? Not really. So Wano strikes me as a story that could only exist in this story to a greater extent than almost anything else. You think of One Piece and you think of Water 7 Enies Lobby, Marineford, Skypiea, Dressrosa, and those just feel like classic One Piece arcs. But Wano may be the most One Piece arc when all is said and done. We'll see how it goes. Anyways, I've been waffling for a long time. Before I get any deeper into this, and I do want to, this is where I'll insert the AJPiece comments for this video, which were in response to the Whole Cake Island video. So those will come in right here. So the first comment for today's AJPiece stuff is from Sonic Belt. Amazing analysis as always. Something that always stands out to me as an understated theme of Whole Cake Island is the idea of Big Mom and disability. I work with kids with various disabilities and conditions, and oftentimes they may present with behavioral issues as a result of not having access to the accommodations they need. From my perspective, Linlin's hunger pains are essentially a disability within the scope of the One Piece world. It's a condition that she was seemingly born with, it's completely out of her control. In fact, she may not even be aware that it's happening, and it significantly impacts her ability to live the typical life that her parents wanted for her. In an ideal scenario, Linlin would have received some sort of treatment or accommodation that would allow her to live more normally, and may have turned out to be a completely different person. But instead, she is repeatedly abandoned and exploited by the adults around her, something that unfortunately happens all too often in the real world. And as a result of this, she grows into the deeply disturbed person that would rather kill those around her than have them abandon her, that we know as Big Mom. Again, in the real world, if someone with a mental disorder harms another person, they get sent in for psychiatric help. I just feel like if a couple of things had gone the other way, Big Mom may never have existed, and Charlotte Linlin could have had a better life. Just some stuff swirling around in my head, can't wait for you to catch up. That's a really cool and sad parallel. I find that to be, like, that's not a lens that I viewed it through initially, while obviously sort of acknowledging that it was very debilitating for her. It's still not a lens that I viewed her through initially. So I really appreciate that sort of perspective and shining a light on that through your experiences, through your life, in a way that I wouldn't have really thought of prior. I think that's absolutely true. And what I really like about it is that at least off the top of my head, I don't believe that Oda has quite tackled that idea of making allusions to disabilities in the story thus far. Not quite to that extent. I know some people have talked to me or like written in the comments that some of the characters may be coded to have certain some sort of developmental disabilities, but not not quite to this level of, not quite to a level that debilitates one's life as much as it does for Big Mom. And so that makes her stand out quite a bit for me. She was already really fractured and fragmented and such an interesting psychology to look through and dissect. And the way that she bounced off Luffy and foiled him was really, really, I think, noteworthy in telling you about both characters and throwing both into sharp relief. But this makes her stand out even more, and makes her even more of a fully fleshed out character of her own, as if she needed it. She was already one. I'm not saying that she wasn't, but it just adds even more nuance and layers to it. So thank you for that. That is a really interesting interpretation. Lasercat says, you're spot on with the analysis about masks, especially when you consider the parallel in Judge making Sanji wear that iron mask as a symbol of rejection. Blends in so well with the themes you mentioned, and the foreshadowing with Duval being a guy in an iron mask who just so happens to look like Sanji is both hilarious and ingenious. I was already a weekly reader back then, and the wedding cake chase was a tad slow for my liking, but Whole Cake Island is still my favorite post-time skip arc. Really fun comment, don't have a ton to say about it, except for the fact that I did not think about that Duval stuff at all. I didn't think about that. Him having the iron mask is quite a bit of really, really sort of delicious dark humor that I hadn't have thought of prior to this. And I think it's yet another idea, another indicator that while Oda takes years to get to these stories, these backstories, and while I know he doesn't plan out everything, there's some things there's a sort of element of improvisation, sort of natural improvisation to a lot of the things that happen, I'm sure. But a lot of broad strokes things are planned out years in advance, and I can't imagine Oda just kind of giggling to himself as he writes Duval with this mask, knowing what it really means. Bit of an evil giggle, but a giggle nonetheless. That's a really cool touch, so thank you. Calcelmo Anairu says, fun game. If you had to sum up every One Piece arc with one word, what would it be? That's a great question. Romance Dawn, I would want to say romance, but that's kind of cheating. So let's go with adventure. And I don't really want to expand upon these, otherwise we'd be here all day, but maybe you can kind of guess why I say some of the things that I say to describe these arcs. Most of it should be obvious, it probably won't be hard at all, but nonetheless. Orange Town, Instinct. Bit of a out there one, but maybe you know what I mean. Syrup Village, Tales. Baratie, Principles. Arlong Park, Family. Log Town, Eras. Reverse Mountain, Yearning. Whiskey Peak, Catalyst. Little Garden, Progress. Drum Island, Heal. Alabasta, Rain. Jaya and Skypia, both of them, I would say Dream. Long Ring, Long Land, Past, or The Past. I am ignoring 80 to 90% of the arc by using that word for it, but you know what I mean. Water 7, Fear. Enies Lobby, Courage. Thriller Bark, Life. Sabaudi Archipelago, Devastation. Amazon Lily, Heart. Impel Down, Momentum. Marineford, Loss. Post-War, Perseverance. Return to Sabaudi, Reunion. Fishman Island, Progress. I feel like I might have used that for a prior one. If I have, Connection. Punk Hazard, Duality. Dressrosa, Freedom. Whole Cake Island, I have used Family already in Arlong Park, so I will say Bonds. Zoe, Myth. Reverie, Narrative. And Wano, Sentiment. So far. Great question. Maybe you can make sense of those words that I just used. That was an awesome question. Last couple. Melaron Neff asks, I'm curious how your assessment of the darkness of One Piece pre- and post-timeskip have developed as you continue to read and you've made your way towards catching up. So, this is in reference because I think I've said this in these videos and on King Recon's podcast as well, that I thought that basically Sabaudi would be the darkest the series would get. Sabaudi, Marineford, like the death in Marineford, post-war, basically Luffy at his lowest. I thought that was the darkest the series would get. However, in terms of subject matter, I think it's fair to say that on average, post-timeskip, it has been darker. The subject matter has been darker. I'm going to take an L on that one. Now, I do maintain that for our protagonist, the lowest point will continue to be the end of Sabaudi, into losing Ace, into his grief post-war prior to Jinbei helping him get up. That I don't think we'll reach a lower point for Luffy in the story. But I think it's fair to say that it has gotten darker in terms of subject matter. And yet, the crew and their position psychologically, how empowered they feel, how confident they feel, how confident Luffy is, has been consistently higher than it has been pretty much for all of pre-timeskip. And I think that helps balance things out and keep it very One Piece, even if the subject matter gets a lot darker. It's an interesting stylistic contrast and progression. And then the last one is from AD. Putting sacrificing her own happiness for Sanji is the ultimate redemption arc for her. She spent her life abused by her mother, being told that she's ugly and unlovable, until Sanji immediately without a thought does one act of kindness by turning that abuse on its head. Of course she acts confused and deranged for the rest of the arc. Her whole worldview was challenged. Oda actually took the trope of a tsundere and gave it a meaningful backstory to exist for Pudding, and in the end she erases Sanji's memory, because she knows that if she lets him remember, lets him know how she feels about him, he would never leave her there. He would steal her away with him, and that would put his life in even more danger. So, to keep him from further endangering himself, she lets him believe that she doesn't love him. What an amazing, tragic love story. Sanji and Pudding are the only two characters that I hope truly end up together in the end. It's a really interesting interpretation of that, and one that I buy into. I think there are also elements of the idea of finding a place for herself in this place. Like, I think that for her personal growth, her being able to accept herself through the love or through the acceptance and care that Sanji gives to her, or shows to her, is her next step to grow in her life. And I think that if she told Sanji that she loved him and he took her away, as could have happened, she wouldn't have been able to do that development for herself. I think that she realizes, in a sort of Lost Children Berserk-esque way, that she needs to find her place, struggle for herself, find her place, and then maybe, in a later part in her life, when she's at a different point developmentally, she would be able to go on an adventure or something, if that's something she would have wanted. But I think that she also realizes that, yes, it would put Sanji in danger, but also, she has some progressing to do. And I think it's very mature of her, and very heartbreaking, but the fact that she's able to think of that despite what her heart wants is really beautiful. So yeah, great summary of Pudding's character. I really am quite a fan of her, and I'm glad that a lot of you think so as well. I think she's as essential, despite not being quite as major, I think she's as essential to Whole Cake Island as an arc as Katakuri is, as Big Mom is, as Sanji is, because I just think she's this little bit of a device. I don't want to speak too mechanically about her because she's a heart and soul, flesh and blood character, very human, but she's a great device that allows everything to tick properly. Anyways, thank you for the AJPiece comments. If you'd like yours to be included in a future video, just be sure to use the hashtag AJPiece and it'll be entered into a pool of comments and maybe read aloud during Wano 3 if there is one. But, wow, what is there to say about the beginning of Wano so far? It is, well, let's just get this out of the way, it is awesome stuff. It's interesting because I've heard a lot of people say that Wano is a big mixed bag. I've heard a lot of people say that Wano is a big mixed bag, that it has maybe the biggest peaks in all of One Piece, but that it also has some of the lowest lows. I'm not seeing that, really. I'm really not seeing the lowest lows. I'm not seeing any valleys. I think it's a strong, obviously it's going to be, it's not going to be perfect and completely tight, and there's not going to be any excess, but in terms of tightness, this has to be the most focused arc, maybe outside of Zoe, and Reverie if you count that, post-time skip. It's one of the most lean arcs so far in the series. I really hold strong to that. I think every chapter is efficient. I think every chapter has something really important that's done. Not much is done without rhyme or reason. I don't think much is redundant, like there is quite a bit of in Skypiea. And yeah, everything's contributory, everything's cohesive. And in terms of structure and execution, I think this is one of the most well-done One Piece arcs so far. It's a very gradual build-up. It builds the world really beautifully in really natural ways. It's very efficient, building characters in the world at the same time, introducing themes, very natural exposition. Like, Oda is in his bag in Wano. I really, really, truly think so, at least so far. And the Odin Roger flashback promises to be maybe the peak of the arc, if not one of the big peaks of the arc and the whole series. But up until this point, there's been less flashy stuff, not a ton of huge flashy things, but it's been superb storytelling. It's been one of the best starts to an arc throughout the whole series, and I really don't see the mixed bag comments in this. I think the lows, like there's some dumb stuff here and there, I suppose. We'll get into a couple of things that weren't great, but by and large, it's one of the most clean, well-done One Piece arcs in terms of structure and execution. Kaido's established really well, Luffy's built upon, there's great legendary moments, without those huge watershed series-defining moments like you might expect at the end of Fishman Island or Dressrosa or Whole Cake Island. There hasn't been that quite yet, but there's been great stuff. And to get this out of the way, Wano is absolutely, in terms of premise and just what we've seen in content, one of the darkest arcs in One Piece. We have these people, these citizens of Wano who have been oppressed for years and years and years. Some who have been told to wait 20 years and who just cannot do it any further and die fighting for something in vain, it seems like. It seems like, because it's not in vain, but in the moment it really seems like it is. We have a people who are horrifically oppressed. We have full villages of people who are literally unable to grieve the deaths of their loved ones and are forced to laugh at it. Just top to bottom, this is one of the darkest One Piece arcs. I wouldn't say it's quite as dark as Sabaody just yet, because that was Luffy and the Straw Hats at their lowest, absolutely. But in terms of content, it may well end up being the darkest. We'll see how it goes. While the Straw Hats are in a better place and more experienced and more triumphant, the challenges they're taking on and the islands they go to are, like, on average, quite a bit darker than pre-time skip. So it is dark, And part of the reason that this is dark is one of the things I take away from Wano the most. This land is defined by this serene spirituality. The people here have such a sense of home and nostalgia and sentiment for what their home was. These are proud, beautiful people with this embedded, deeply rooted, rich culture who were oppressed by Kaido, oppressed by the flames of war, unable to express themselves, unable to retake their home from those who desecrate it. And Wano is essentially, by and large, a fight against the night, a fight to reclaim one's homeland. Generations, people, past and present, people who have died, carrying their memories forward, people who are in the present and scarred by sacrifice. Every generation, young and old, 7-year-olds to 70-year-olds, and then people associated with them, people from Zou, Luffy, the Straw Hats, Jinbei, and the Sun Pirates. It's all built up to this, just to free these people. Freedom. And you coalesce that with dreams. A dream of freedom. You know, I just get this feeling of these people who have been waiting for so long for their salvation. Waiting so long just to be able to fight, and as well for this promised person, this promised day to break the night away. And in their darkest moments, in the bleakest nights, you know, they must have thought of giving up, a lot of these people. Plenty of them did, and you can't blame them. But I think they just held to their heart this feeling of home. And I think that's what gave them strength. And this is the fight back. Retaking this beautiful, beautiful land aesthetically, but also just spiritually. And so that's why I feel this sense of serene spirituality, of sentiment, of nostalgia. This is what they're fighting for their home. And there's been such death and sacrifice, and some people have not been able to wait 20 years. And like I said, you can't blame them for that. But those who remain will carry their wills and legacies forward. They will take their land back from the worst of terrors, and they will fight in the name of Odin, for Momonosuke, fighting for real smiles. And when all is said and done, I feel like Luffy will be the defining factor. This is going to be a huge arc for Luffy and Momo. I think this arc will make Momo into a favorite for me. I think the build-up's all there, as he takes the mantle. With Luffy and Momo potentially being this generation's Roger and Odin, and with, you know, Rocks, what we learned about Rocks, maybe that being represented in the current time by, I've seen some people say Buggy, but I think Blackbeard, but we'll get into the reasoning for that later. Either way, this is this new generation, and they will fight and carry the wills forward of the old generation to bring Wano, open the gates, and free everything into the future. There are some great characters introduced in this arc. There's Tama, love Tama, Okiku, Kaido, Odin, of course. We'll do a lot more with Odin later, but he's wonderful. Yasui, Otoko. I think Wano has the strongest introduction of characters early on in the arc. Maybe of any arc? I don't know. Like, there's a lot of characters. It reminds me of Dressrosa in terms of the quantity of characters, but it's done in a way that they all have memorable roles. And it's done in a drip feed. It isn't a ton at once, which stops it from being super overwhelming, and which helps you find a lot of the characters memorable. Kawamatsu, Ashura, really memorable characters who are all recognizable aesthetically, but also memorable in terms of their execution in the story and the roles they have, and it's just done really well. I think Oda really learned from some mistakes in Dressrosa in terms of introducing a whole cavalcade of characters. There's also Denjiro, there's Hyo, and lots of evolving roles for a lot of the Straw Hats. Beautiful to see them all come together in a lot of ways in this arc. These reunions, you know, for me it just takes a couple months or a few weeks to see Zoro and Sanji fight together, but you guys reading every week, one chapter a week, had to wait years, so very gratifying for me. I can't even imagine for you. And characters coming back into the story, like Kid, like Killer, with these really interesting new roles. The way Wano is illustrated, executed with this sort of water painting feel to it, there's definitely an intent to make this feel different, more Eastern. The acts, oh my gosh, Wano is just different. It is just different. There is more emphasis put on the presentation of this than any other arc in the series, and I say that for the manga, but also in the anime as well, of course. We all know about how it's been prioritized in the anime. Now, Kinemon is much more present. He takes much more leadership. He's a lot more serious, and this is the most I think I've connected to Kinemon in the story thus far. Kanjudo, there's some stuff with Kanjudo that's interesting because, I don't know, I still don't trust him. I still don't think he's just a guy because of the way Oda's presented him. And also there was just this random panel where we see all of the uprising, the characters part of this uprising, and we see all their faces, or most of their faces, I think, but Kanjudo's face was obscured by a text box, and I don't know, maybe it's coincidental, but that sort of thing just builds my suspicion for this guy. He's not just a guy. So lots of characters, but like I said, it doesn't feel bloated like Dressrosa. I think it's done a lot more naturally. They all have context, they all have emotions, they all have a place. And then Orochi. Oh my gosh, Orochi is a great antagonist. The idea of him never being able to devour Odin, his pettiness, his insecurities, inferiority complex, this pathetic fraud of a man. He's done so well. He's very hateable, so I understand that not many will like him, but as someone who is incapable of hating characters and just can't really do that, he's really well written, and so for me, I eat that up. He reminds me a lot of Spandam, but potentially, I think when Wano is done, he might be better than Spandam. He's great. You know, the promise of his past and his connection to Odin and his dynamic with him and his jealousy at these legends, this pettiness, this bitterness, inferiority complex, that stuff is all great. With all that said, we talked about the themes, the characters, the approach, the aesthetics. Let's get into the actual events that happen in Wano, starting with chapter 910. So after the bits we got from chapter 909 with the rest of the crew that weren't at Whole Cake in Wano, the Zoro stuff, the Robin stuff, Frankie, Usopp, whatever, the rest of the crew get marooned after being attacked by a storm, an octopi, and a bunch of carp. It's a great sort of display of the aesthetics of Wano. Immediately. And Luffy washes up on an island, on a beach. He encounters this monkey. You know, we have the waves that are drawn in a more stylized way. We have the koi fish. And Luffy wakes up on this beach and he sees a sort of baboon creature, and he washes up on Wano. Now, he encounters two beast pirates who seem intent on selling a little girl into essentially being trafficked. And this is the build-up to Wano and the oppression there and the history there, we knew we were getting into dark stuff, but this is, like, first couple of chapters, a really explicit thing to show us that, yeah, this is going to be disturbing. This little child, Otama, she was going to be sold into unspeakable things, so thank goodness Luffy saves her. He's taken in by her afterwards. She takes him to her home, or her master's home, she says, and we see that food and water are very scarce. To help Luffy, to reward him for helping her out, she gives Luffy her share of the food. And the water she drinks ends up being poisoned. And we see that Kaido has caused, like, the societal, economic, hierarchical imbalance is just beyond what I imagined initially. I didn't realize it would be this explicit. Basically, these proud people live in poverty. It's really efficient exposition, really effective, very natural. We learn about what Kaido's done and the state of Wano, specifically through learning about Tama. But because she drinks this poisoned, contaminated water from what are usually clean rivers, she falls ill. And we learn from her that actually she is here in Kuri waiting for Ace to come back because she met Ace. Ace went to Wano and they met and they talked and they bonded, and she's been waiting for him for ages, which just adds another layer of tragedy to this poor girl. Meanwhile, Hawkins, who is working under Kaido, learns of what's happened, learns of the Straw Hats, and decides that he has to go nip it in the bud. Also, I've seen that Tama is voiced by Megami Han, one of my favorite voice actresses in the business, who does one of my favorite roles in the conversation for one of the best roles I've ever heard in Gone Freaks and Hunter x Hunter 2011. So, beautiful that she voices Tama here. Luffy then mentions to Otama the truth, which is that Ace has died, and Sorry, I keep going back and forth between Otama and Tama. I might do that throughout this video. But either way, I think it's very important because Tama is essentially where Luffy was during the post-war arc, pre-time skip. And Luffy is now doing the role that Jinbei did for him, for her. Having experienced all of this, having accepted reality, and learned to accept his death, and the reality of what's gone on and what's happened, and he is now passing that wisdom, or that reality check, onto someone who does need to learn this. And so I think it's a great show of Luffy's growth, and I think it's also a great show of his evolving role. He is not always learning now. Now he's someone who provides wisdom, in ways apart from like what he did for Skypia and all this liberation and inspiration for dreams that he's been doing since the beginning. But now he is teaching people these things. The things that others would teach to him, he is now teaching to others, specifically with something as difficult as Ace's death, which he just is. It must be painful to say, but he has to say it. My brother's dead. We also see a flashback where Ace first met Tama, and she said she wanted to go on adventures with him, and he said, maybe a little bit, when you're a little bit older. And notably, we see him putting together the hat that he made for Oars Jr. Beautiful little touch. But Ace, all this time ago, came back to help save their home, just as Luffy seems to be wanting to do. But anyways, Tama's in a bad state. She's been poisoned by the water, so Luffy decides to take her to a clinic or a doctor in town. And we come to the moment, as Zoro seems to be saving a woman in town, and Luffy and Zoro reunite. Oh man, how gratifying. And then Hawkins confronts the both of them. And it's so great to just immediately see them pick up where they left off, as if nothing has even happened, as if they haven't been apart for ages. What seems like ages, and was ages to them, and was ages for us, even more so for you guys, like I mentioned. But anyway, there's a little bit of a quarrel with Hawkins. Don't have much to say about that. They ultimately fend him off, and they take Tama to Sudo's tea shop to be treated after seeing Sudo. I believe Sudo was the one that Zoro was saving. And then we meet Kiku, who is awesome. I love Kiku. Also, Maria Issei voice, beautiful. Gon and Killua both introduced in Wano. And then we see that Law's pirates, the Heart pirates, are awaiting them. We see Beppo and the rest of them, and they notice that Luffy and Zoro are here. As Tama is being healed by Sudo, we hear a bit of exposition, the long and short of which is that the Kozuki clan has been under Kaido's rule for 20 years. The flames of war have overtaken it for 20 years. But then, someone who is Gazelle Man kidnaps Tama and takes her to part of town called the Bakura district, to which Zoro and Luffy immediately give chase. It is immediately go, go, go in Wano, and it's very fast, it's pulsating, there's great emotional highs with the Ace stuff and Luffy and Zoro meeting up, but then there's this action, and yet there's so much exposition and information that's given to us. It's great efficiency. It's super engaging, but there's tons of information and foundations being laid. And this is what I mean about Wano being so tight and focused and structured. It's worth mentioning that we are introduced to these insane designs through these minor antagonists like Hold'em, who have these artificial smile fruits. Hold'em in particular is just... he's got a lion belt? I don't know. Anyways, Kiku, Zoro, and Luffy all gate crash to save Tama. And Kiku has this incredibly badass moment where she slices off the top knot of Urashima after he tells her to become his wife. There's a bit of an interesting, kind of silly, but very fitting for One Piece, sumo wrestling thing between Luffy and Urashima. Don't have much to say about that. I heard it was really extended in the anime. But it's great as Luffy overpowers. Luffy is muscled up in this arc, particularly also for reasons that happen a little bit down the line, but it's worth noting that his character design, just naturally, he's matured, and he's also, he's toned up, he's muscled up, he looks great. Hold'em faces Luffy, Hawkins is going back into town. Kiku then tells Luffy that Hold'em will bring forth Jack, who we've seen in and out of the last few arcs, and who is now back in Wano. Anyways, Luffy ultimately frees Tama, but in seeing the suffering that she has experienced from them, he is enraged, and through that rage, through his desire to protect her, uses his Red Hawk attack, and in one of the most beautiful moments post-time skip for me, as Luffy embodies Ace, all that he stands for, carries forth his will, but also shows to Tama this man who was such a hero to her. It's beautiful as he saves Ace's friend, this person he truly cared for, with his power, with a power done in his name, embodying Ace and all that he is, carrying forth his spirit, and also just being this sort of person himself, Luffy, to save Tama. He lives on through Luffy. He still protects Tama through Luffy. And interestingly, Tama was saved. Tama was saved at this point, but Luffy was just enraged at what had been done to her. Very similarly to how Ace could not let Whitebeard's name be besmirched, which led to his death. But the opposite sort of fate happens here. As well, Tama was taken prisoner by Hold'em and saved by Luffy, which is a parallel to post-war where Luffy was saved by Ace and Sabo. And then, of course, he uses his move here based on Ace's fruit. Lots of parallels here, just to embody Ace and his how he lives on, and his will echoes forward in the story. His sentiment is never forgotten. And so, he's not truly dead. Anyways, at the end of this chapter at 9:17, we see that Law hears of Luffy, and he's going, oh god, this poor guy's been stressed out ever since the Straw Hats came into his life, but I doubt that he would change anything. And so he stops Hawkins from making their way to the Straw Hats. So after this point, they use Tama's power to tame this antagonist named Speed, who is this artificial smile fruit user, who is a half horse, half human, and Tama's power is used to tame her, to tame Speed. Now, I find this kind of strange and kind of, I don't know, since liberating this population is essentially one of the main goals of the arc, if not, I guess it's the main goal of the arc, liberating Wano, freedom for these people. A character who has been subjugated and oppressed and caged in the way that Tama has, Tama's kind of a personification of that, among other things, of course, but she is one of the foremost personifications of that oppression. Using her power to literally brainwash, mind control the antagonist into doing what we want is, I don't know, it feels like it's undercutting the message a little bit. It's not a huge problem, and I know that needs must, and at this point, you gotta use whatever's at your disposal to achieve your goal. It makes sense. I just question the story decision to have that happen, because it's a little conflicting. I don't know. It's not that I disagree with Tama doing that and Luffy doing that to succeed and get their freedom. I just question the place of that specific way of doing it in this arc if you're wanting to sort of condemn the idea of cyclical oppression. I don't know, that's just my take on it. It's not a huge deal, I just think it's a little bit of a problem, it's a little bit tone deaf. But regardless, Law meets up with the rest of them, with Luffy, Zoro, Tama, Kiku. They fight their way out, and Luffy says one of my favorite lines of his in the entire arc so far, which is, by the time we leave this country, it'll be a place where you can eat as much as you want every single day. He says that to Tama. And Tama gets a flashback to Ace, who says something very similar to her in the past. It's a beautiful moment, beautiful how Luffy inherits Ace's will and continues his journey, takes his torch. It's great. And then we're introduced to this concept of the ghosts of Wano that Luffy is going to be introduced to soon, as we see a bunch of gravestones. Gravestone for Kozuki Momonosuke, Raizo, Odin, Kinemon, Kanjudo, these characters that a lot of whom we know are alive, who are not dead. We know Odin's dead, but something weird's going on here, because there are multiple here. There are many who are not dead, but have these gravestones. So this definitely had me thinking at this moment. I was going, did they cover something up? What's going on? I could never have predicted what the case actually was. Now, a lot of the citizens here, the ones who were doing extremely poorly, are given a barge of food and provisions and all that sort of thing. So after this, it's a nice little victory for them. Obviously, the war is not won and they need to retake Wano, but one battle has been won here, and it's very encouraging, and it's really lovely. We're then properly introduced to Den Kyoshiro, who has a great design, who is the Kurozumi clan's money changer, napping Kyoshiro, portrayed antagonistically at first, but we'll see how that went. And he's really interesting. He's got a bit of an aura about him, and he brings up something really interesting, which is that Odin's wife predicted something, had some sort of a prophecy. "You're the moon, unaware of the dawn. May your purpose be fulfilled, and cast 9 shadows on the night woven of 20 years, and you shall know the brilliance of the dawn." That is a proclamation that Toki, Odin's wife, had years and years ago, this sort of prophecy. And I know who this guy is, so I love the expression on his face when he thinks back to this, because I didn't really think of this when I first saw it, but he has this beautiful, wistful, idealistic expression on his face when he thinks back to Toki's words here. Of course, Orochi, being paranoid as he is, took this as an extreme threat, which he should have because he made it that way. But those who witnessed that prophecy and know those words took the proper message away from it. And it is one of hope and legacy for Odin and for previous generations to pass on their wills to those who follow. But we then see the ruins of Odin Castle as Luffy and co. Make their way to the gravestones, and Luffy's really confused. He doesn't really understand what's going on. Then we meet Kinemon. We see Kinemon, who says one of the wildest things, which is that him, Raizo, Momo, Kanjuro have all traveled in time from the past. They went 20 years into the future. And they meet up again with Momo and Sanji and Chopper, Carrot, Brook, Nami. It's a beautiful reunion, but it's punctuated by this mystery of how the hell time travel occurred in One Piece. And then we get a bit of a backstory from Kinemon about what's going on here. We kind of could have guessed this before, but more specifics are given here rather than subtext. And he says that Odin was once the leader of Wano. He liberated the once lawless Kuri, and everyone adored him. He was well loved, he was an icon, he was a legend, a living legend. However, he was killed by Orochi. Kaido was working with Orochi, and they took over the land, and it was chaos and mayhem, and they were in dire straits until Toki, Odin's wife, used her devil fruit power, which sent Momo, Kinemon, Kanjuro, Raizo, and Kiku 20 years into the future. And then we come back to the current time, and they've recruited those who were loyalists to Odin, who've been hiding in the shadows or just surviving, waiting for this day. And they've gotten a bit of a force. It is an uphill struggle, but with the Straw Hats' help, with their plan, with their spirit, and their desire to win back their freedom, they have a fighting chance. And they're going to achieve this by conducting a raid on Onigashima in a couple of weeks, in 2 weeks. This happens on the night of the Fire Festival. And so just the way this sets the stage aesthetically, this beautiful festival, this night festival where everyone's celebrating at the same time as which these oppressed people will be carrying out this raid to these supposedly unsuspecting oppressors, trying to win back the freedom that sort of festival represents, on this beautiful island full of color and vibrancy and life that needs to be restored to what it was, what it represented, not what it represents now. This idea of generations of people, Odin was killed, then some of them got sent forward in time, separated from their loved ones. Others had to stay back, were missing these people, missing Odin, suffering. They had to wait 20 years, pass down this knowledge to the next generation, and gather this cause, and just hope, the faintest glimmer of hope, that maybe they can retake their homeland. Maybe they can embody Odin and all that he was, and take it back in his stead, in a way to sort of do him right, do right by his spirit. That just means so much to me. There is so much, it's such a coalescing of such hope, such little actions that had to happen for them to get this way, to come together now. And I'm skipping ahead a little bit, but you think of Denjiro, who had to bide his time for 20 years. You think of Hiyori, I'm skipping ahead again, but again, having to disguise herself, bide her time as well. You think of Kinemon and Momo and Kanjuro and Raizo, these people who were separated in another time, had to come to grips with these unfamiliar surroundings to then gather themselves and fight for that same cause. Whether these people were waiting 20 years or a matter of months, this is deeply, deeply meaningful for each of them for different reasons, but it's a common cause, and that is taking back their home. This yearning. And of course, Luffy, this advocate of home and freedom and dreams, is absolutely willing to help. We get introduced to a kunoichi named Shinobu, who is an advocate of their cause and a major figure. She's cool. I like her quite a bit. And more is explained about this raid plan. Essentially, more people need to be recruited, and they do a lot of cool little things with the symbol of the Kozuki clan, and spreading word throughout in very covert ways, very subtle ways, that only those who would know, and then join their cause again. It's really well done. I like it. It's very realistic with regards to, or believable rather, with regards to what needs to happen to gather this momentum, because you can't do it out in the street. And then right at the end of this chapter, 921, we see Kaido confront Jack and say that he wants the Straw Hats brought to him, specifically Luffy, and he turns to his dragon form. This was unbelievable to witness. This was crazy. Not only does Kaido have one of the best character designs in the series, on his own, but his dragon form is just out of this world. It just looks so grand and epic and stylized in the rest of the aesthetic of Wano. The bright blue coloring, it is beautiful. It is a beautiful character design for his dragon form, and it is menacing and fearsome and huge. And what a visual demonstrator of what they're fighting against. Kaido is scary. He gives off a similar feel to Sir Crocodile in Alabasta, just on a grander scale, of this, what it seems like a hurdle that, in order to progress, you have to clear this, but it is so difficult to do so. Now, I think I'm going to talk a lot about Kaido and the subtext and the messages I get from his character in part 2 of this video series for Wano. I mean, to put it bluntly, Kaido is amazing. I think he's a fantastic character, and I haven't even gotten to the core of who he is yet, or the absolute core of his character. Or I haven't seen any conclusions about his character. But the bits I've gathered through a lot of subtext show me that this is one of the best villains or antagonists in One Piece, and he's a character that you really have to challenge yourself to try to get. And I know that's a bit of a cliche, and because of that, like, people who are casual watchers or readers of One Piece, if they're not invested in Kaido from the off, I think that's totally valid for people to say, you know, I wasn't interested in him, Oda didn't make me interested in him, so I didn't feel, like, motivated to dig into his character to get that appreciation. And that's fair. That's a subjective take that I don't agree with or don't relate to, because Kaido's always been interesting to me from the first chapter I saw him, and everything about him just made me want to dig into the little things we see. And his alcohol, his drunken rambles, how it coalesces with his fixation on death and suicide. Those are very key. I won't really make any conclusions this video, but I just want to stick a pin in them because they're very important pieces of the puzzle that add up over time as you get more and more pieces to see this comprehensive picture of who the man is. And at this point, I think he's one of the shining stars of Wano as a character. But anyway, my point is we see him drunk here as well. He eventually confronts Luffy and Law and co, and Luffy and Kaido start trading blows. Let me just say that this is beautifully illustrated. This is some of Oda's best art in the entire series. And not only is it beautifully composed, it flows really well, it just looks great, but having to draw that dragon over and over in all these panels, in these spreads, having Luffy fight with him, I don't know, it just must be so much work and so much of a bit of a struggle. Weekly, I mean, that's insane. But it looks it's paid off beautifully, especially in color. It's just, this art is probably, let's just put it this way, I wouldn't be surprised if Wano ends up becoming my favorite arc in terms of art by the time I'm finished with it. But then we get to the showdown, as we see Luffy punching Kaido. We see views of it from throughout the city to give this sense of scale to it, and also just showing off Wano as a setting even more. They trade blows, they fight here. Luffy then sees Speed, who tells Luffy that Tama has been hurt. She tried to protect her, but she wasn't able to. And Luffy is enraged by this, and he thinks that all this will end if I just defeat Kaido right here. And this is crazy. This is within the first 15-20 chapters of the arc. 15 chapters? This all happens so quick. It's so rapid. The stakes immediately get ramped up. And, you know, if I didn't know from the outset that Wano was the series' longest arc, I would have I don't know that I would have thought that it would have ended after this, because there's such a build up to it. There's clearly so much more to be explored, but I would have been thrown for a loop at least a little bit at this sort of climactic battle happening here. Luffy proclaims that he's going to be the king of the pirates, and he sort of wallops Kaido, just keeps punching him. Kaido transforms back to human. Luffy transforms using Gear 4. Kaido just slowly gets up, and in one of the most impactful page turns in the entire series, just runs through Luffy. Just runs right through him. With his Thunder Bagua, with this club of his. Such an impactful, powerful, oppressive spread, very appropriate considering the character we're talking about here, as he just lays Luffy out and Luffy is utterly defeated. Again, another Alabasta parallel. And Kaido just looks down on him, and he goes, "What was that, boy?" As if he had the gall, the audacity to proclaim that he could be king of the pirates, when he is so far beneath his level. And here is another bit I want to add to the ever-growing puzzle of Kaido. This almost like a lamentation of weakness and a desire to dance at the absolute peak with peak opponents, and Luffy disappoints him in this way. That is very important, but even more important is that Luffy has been defeated, and he's going to need to get himself up and grow from this. Now, Law tries to get Luffy back, but he's stopped by Hawkins, and we see Luffy's sort of unconscious body. He's knocked out, but Kaido says something very interesting, which is that, "I don't know whether it is indomitable spirit or an empty bluff, but he's been glaring at me this entire time." And they go, "He's knocked out." But Kaido sees a glare in those eyes. Despite looking down on him and sort of cursing his audacity, he senses something in Luffy, this indomitable spirit, and he's spot on. So he concludes that they need to break that spirit, and so they'll have Luffy captive as a prisoner, and they'll try to break his spirit in that way so he can become a soldier for Kaido. Also worth pointing out that Ashura is introduced here, and I'm a huge fan of Ashura. I think he's great. We'll talk a bit more about him later. Kiku makes her way to the rest of the Straw Hats and sort of explains the situation to them. About what happened with Luffy, with Kaido, with everything. And there's some humor, some sort of slapstick humor, as the rest of the Straw Hats who were not present with the rest of them, Frankie, Robin, Usopp, in their disguises, learn of Luffy's capture at in their different sort of roles throughout Wano. And they have these really slapstick, ugly, funny faces in reacting to it. Now, Luffy is then put in prison, and who would have thought, he is placed right next to Captain Eustace Kidd, who seems to be on this crusade of revenge against Kaido. He despises Kaido, and he says that he's going to get him. And with that, with a twang of the shamisen, as we see this shamisen player, with this very distinctive sort of tealish, turquoise-ish hair, and with that, Wano Act 1 ends. And I had no idea that Wano was an act, but how beautiful, you know? This part of the arc has a very distinct start, middle, and finish. It's like a mini arc on its own of 15, 17 chapters, whatever it is. And it works so well as an introduction to Wano. Exposition very swiftly, deftly, naturally integrated. We know exactly what the situation is. Obviously, specifics will be delved into, but all the major players are told to us, and everyone who gets introduced after that is just enriching it. But in terms of the plot, we know what needs to happen and what probably will happen, and how they need to get there. Everyone has to sort of reintegrate themselves into the proper positions to fight back after this blow from Kaido on Luffy. Luffy's in prison. The Straw Hats need to fight back. Kinemon and co. need to get the word out. We don't know what's going on with Kid at this point. Jinbei isn't back yet, so there's lots of unknowns, but the broad strokes are all set up and done so well. And Kaido's more interesting. We have, like, every character that's introduced here has a very, like I alluded to in the beginning, has such a distinct role, a function. It's all done so well. This is maybe the best start to an arc, at least a longer arc in the series. And yeah, I have no complaints whatsoever. It's very tight, it's very focused, it's very efficient. This is one of the most efficient arcs. And given the way people talked about it, like I always say, I don't let my expectations be affected by what people say, but if I did, I would have expected this to be bloated and very redundant. But this first act is so swift and tight and focused and does so many things so well. So Great stuff from Act 1. And from there, we start Act 2. Act 2 is great as well. A lot of it focuses on these sort of little mini politics, these sort of covert operations as everyone sort of jigs themselves into position, like I mentioned. So I don't know how much of the minutiae I'll get into, but yeah, let's get into it anyway. Now, it starts with this beautiful choice to essentially catch up, do that thing I love, catch up around the world with a lot of the news as characters we know and love, or know and dislike, whatever, react to news throughout the land about what's going on with Luffy and the crew. And to that end, we then catch up with Perona and Mihawk. Their interactions are really cute. I really like them together. But Perona realizes that Moria is alive. Sorry, I kind of made it seem like they're reacting exclusively, these people are reacting exclusively to news about Luffy throughout Wano. But as tends to be the case with One Piece, there are multiple things happening throughout the world, and multiple characters reacting to multiple things. This is one of them. It isn't just to do with Wano and Luffy. So yeah, Perona realizes that her beloved Gecko Moria is okay, and he seems ready to confront Teach, Blackbeard. We also see a new character named Katarina Devon, and finally, after a long while, see this gigantic spread of Blackbeard, draped, like, he is a huge figure, right? He is draped with these women around him. And I would be remiss if I did not mention the parallels visually with Whitebeard. That first spread we get of him, attached to those machines with women around him. Blackbeard continues to be this bastardization of Whitebeard. And Blackbeard is thrilled by everything going on Wano, the power struggle between Luffy and Kaido, Big Mom maybe playing a part in it. All of that, he is reveling in it. And one of the best news of this chapter, we learn that Absalom is dead. Shiryu now has his fruit power. Then we also learn through Blackbeard that the Revolutionary Army crashed the Reverie, Sabo and everyone, to try to get Kuma back. Again, Kuma continues to be one of the most fascinating characters in the story. The allusions to a backstory, the plot, the subtext you can get from in between the layers of his character, and the Revolutionary Army's attachment to him. They tried to get him. They were unsuccessful, and they clashed with Fujitora and Ryokugyu, which is hugely important context for what was happening with the Reverie. So it was cool to have 2/3 of a chapter or so to catch us back up. But then we get back to Wano with Act 2 as it begins, as Inu tries to get Ashura Doji to rejoin. And I think Ashura's point of view is very important. What he says essentially is that after waiting 20 years, not everyone is going to jump to join them again. They've been burned, they've been hurt, they still have grief, they still have pain, they're in agony, they've been oppressed for years and years. Some of them are just willing to jump at attention to join their cause. And I like that he's hesitant. I like that he thinks here and doesn't join right away, because that's very human. And I think it's an important part of this mosaic of personalities and the types of ways that people look at and interact with the reality of the situation. It's hard. It's deeply difficult. In addition to this, we're introduced to Queen and King, who are the beast pirates performers, these huge heads of Kaido's army. Messages from the Kosuke clan are spread throughout the kingdom. People react to it, people see it. Again, covert operations all over the place, Nami, Shinobu. And then we get back to the prison that Luffy is being kept, where we see that him and Kid kind of have this big shonen antagonist rivalry going on, where they sort of compete to do their tasks, to get their food. It's great. It's great. They're making waves even in this prison, as you would expect of both of them. Also, we're introduced to this character named Dobon. These artificial smile fruit designs. Also, throughout these prison chapters, we see that Caribou is there. He's a prisoner at Udon. And we also see brief but very substantial flashes of these eyes peering out from a darkened cell of this figure who seems to be very important. Sanji then meets up with the rest of the Straw Hats. It's cool to see them together again. They then come up, because Sanji works at a soba stall, they then meet this young girl named Otoko, who just is so thrilled at being able to taste such beautiful, brilliant food from Sanji. Again, nice little detail about the societal, economic state of Wano. And Sanji has some lovely interactions with her as a fellow food appreciator and someone just a generally sweet person. It's really lovely. We then learn from Otoko that Komurasaki, the Oiran, is heading this beautiful, prestigious woman who is the top courtesan in all of Wano, a superstar, as is proclaimed. She is heading to a banquet for Orochi. Sanji and Robin and all these people hear of it, and so this banquet seems like one of the next big story beats. Then Kyoshido gets word of Sanji and Frankie having beat up some of their guys earlier in the chapter, and then sends some assassins to take them out. Luffy and Kid have these sort of parallel journeys as they try to escape the prison. He talks with Raizo, who's trying to help him get an escape plan going. He meets with this man named Hyo and strikes up a quick friendship with him, a quick connection. We get a bit of background for Komurasaki, who is pursued by men who try to kill her for swindling them, essentially. It's established very quickly that she is a cold customer, ruthless, pragmatic, smart, knows what she's doing. And then Momonosuke reveals to Tama that he had a sister that he knew and loved before he was transported 20 years into the future. So we have someone who's gonna be in her late 20s or so, who's currently operating in Wano somewhere. Right after a chapter focused on this Oiran Komurasaki, it was pretty easy to tell that this was Hiyori. So Momo's sister Hiyori is currently doing this covert operation as Komurasaki, which is so interesting, so cool, and it makes you sort of like yearn for those two to be brought back together again, these two siblings. It's been a long wait for Momo, it's been much longer for Hiyori, and after what happened to her family, her father. But the side plots just keep building and building and building in Wano. A character gets a new element added to them every chapter to make it richer. Some element to the plot gets added, to the world, the mythos of to the setting, the culture of Wano, to the prophecy, to the themes. It's just so well done. It builds upon itself so beautifully, without ever feeling bloated, which is such an achievement for an arc of this length. Now, Hiyori, disguised as Komurasaki, makes her way over to Orochi. These next couple of chapters don't have some bits that, again, gonna kind of skim over them because it's a lot of sort of intermingling of the little operations being done to make their way to Kaido to gather support, all that sort of thing. Very interesting, very engaging, but don't have much to say about it in a review like this. But what I do want to point out is that Orochi has this meeting with CP0. They have these trades, these barters going on. Doflamingo is now gone, obviously, so there is this black hole and things are, the middleman's gone, and there is a little bit of an awkward or tense nature to these dynamics, these discussions. Orochi then tells them to send Vegapunk to him. He sort of flaunts his power. He says that Kaido is backing him up. And you can tell that this is someone who is drunk on his power. He hides behind the strong back of Kaido and the might he's garnered. But in reality, he is just a small man. Petty, vindictive, inferiority complex, never going to be able to devour Oden. But the banquet begins, and we're introduced at the end of this chapter to Drake, who is part of the Tobi Roppo, this elite force working for Kaido, and Page 1. We'll get introduced properly to the Tobi Roppo later down the line, but yeah, Page 1 makes his first appearance here. And they are the assassins sent to take out Sanji after Kyoshido told Queen, who asked them, or told them, to take out Sanji. We then see that Big Mom is making her way over to Wano. She's being fended off by King and Kaido's forces, but she's making her way. Zoro is then taken to Ebisu Town, where he sees these people who are down on their luck, but just seem to be able to laugh at everything, seem to smile, seem happy, seem to laugh at it all, and Zoro smiles this sweet smile, and it feels like an encapsulation of the hope that keeps these people going in these times of darkness, the hope that's required to hope for a brighter future and carry it out. And those are the things that I thought when I first read this chapter. Little did I know that this was one of the darkest things I've seen in all of One Piece. This is a false horizon. This is horrific. Little did I know that as Zoro is smiling at these people's high spirits, they are being forced to have these high spirits. So disgusting, so disturbing, and that'll be nailed home in a little bit. And Sanji, who is having to fight off Drake and Page 1, takes out the canister from his sort of military suit, which is very symbolic. The comparison I drew was one to Nami. Nami will never be able to shake the part of her life that was in servitude to Arlong. That tattoo she had was an embodiment of that. But she was able to change that tattoo. She was able to make it into something different and more representative of her life and who she was and who she will be going forward and what matters to her. So the mark that Arlong left on her will never leave her. She can't ignore that, repress it, avoid it. You can't. But she will use that experience to empower her to be strong and look forward and live her life the way she wants to live it. That is what I get from this. Sanji using his family's technology, not avoiding it, is him using it for his own purposes, in a way that he sees fit, not being controlled by it, not having to exclusively do horrible things with their power, which I like. It's very subtextual, very symbolic, but it's a common link between two Straw Hats, and I like what it means for Sanji's character after Whole Cake Island. Sorry, I don't think I mentioned that he uses the suit as well. He pulls out the canister at the end of the chapter, and then uses his suit. Robin, as this beloved courtesan, starts to sort of investigate what's going on at the banquet around Orochi's domain, but she is caught by Orochi's men. And then, in one of the most bizarre elements of Wano so far, Chopper, Momonosuke, Tama, and Kiku discover Big Mom washed up on the beach after her bouts with King. And she has completely lost her memory. She has amnesia. The sort of thing that makes a lot of people cower in fear when it comes to stories. She has no idea who she is, and only seems to have sort of the base personality of who she was as a girl, as a young girl. She's very childish. And, you know, I don't think there's any two ways about it. This is a messy, sort of lazy, clunky way for Big Mom to progress in the story and get where she needs to get. And it feels like it's just like Oda didn't really know exactly how to get her where he wanted her to go, and so amnesia. She doesn't know who she is. It's an easy way to get her there. Now, I don't want to be cynical and assume, but that's just how it reads to me because it's not super well done. It feels a little contrived. It feels a little lazy. I don't think it's great writing. However, I think something great comes out of it because we heard the backstory of Big Mom. We saw the person she used to be as a kid, as Lin, Charlotte Lin, before she was Big Mom. And she is still that girl. She is still that girl. There's just a lot of layers on top of her of politics and power and ego and darkness. And so with her memory lost, a lot of her interactions with people around her, with Chopper, Momo, with all these people around her, are very sweet. She's very caring. She makes connections with them. She's quite compassionate. And she's very non-Big Mom-like. And I think this is a great way of showing who she really was at heart before she was warped by a bunch of things that we talked about in Whole Cake Island. So I think the purpose of it is good, the concept of it is good, it's contrived in how it gets there, but I'd rather have it like this than not have it at all. So I'm down with it, it's fine. From this point, Robin is able to escape, and then gives the information she got to the rest of the Straw Hats when she meets up with them. At the banquet, Orochi talks about the 9 scabbards that are sort of this legacy of Odin. These 9 soldiers, these 9 people who were his men, and he seems to be scared of their ghosts. He just lives in perpetual fear. As this person, this insecure, small person, in so many ways, he just shudders at the slightest hint of Odin's ghost. He terrifies him. And so his legacy in these 9 scabbards terrifies him. And there are some great little bits of dialogue here, specifically from Denjiro, because we have Orochi talking about Lady Komurasaki, who is, of course, Hiyori. And he talks about her as if she's this object of desire, of beauty, without really humanizing her, dehumanizing her. And Denjiro says, "You seem to have confused a geisha for a pet dog, my friend. A person is a flower. If you are not the clear, pristine water at her roots, how is a woman to bloom into her true beauty?" And, he says that in a way that does not antagonize Orochi. But if you read between the lines here, he is not a fan of the way that Orochi dehumanizes Hiyori. And women in general, it seems like. And as well, Denjiro says, if Kinemon and the Akazaya samurai should appear, I for one would welcome it. I would enjoy the chance to show you my skill with the blade. He says that to Orochi, and he means it. He's not lying. He just means it that he's going to be on the other side, showing him his skill from the other side. As Orochi says, "Oh, I'm glad to have you on my side," and he doesn't say anything. Beautiful little bits that I only really properly see on reread that allude to Denjiro, and just, he's a great character, and it helps substantiate him further and further as we see his true identity peeking from behind the mask. Meanwhile, Otoko, who cannot stop herself from laughing, is there at the banquet, and it's seen as an affront to Orochi's pride. So he seeks to punish this tiny child for laughing at him. This tiny child who is screaming that I can't help but laugh. I literally can't help myself. He intends to punish her, and this is enough for Hiyori. Hiyori stops him and slaps him across the face. She is told to apologize, and she says, "I do not grovel before anyone." And she says, amazing, in this beautiful spread, "If you would prefer a weak woman, then strike me down right now. I am the daughter of a samurai. I will not disgrace myself." Oh god, it's so good. Another great character introduction, a proper introduction of a new character. Hiyori is so good, and I love her role in this. Again, another representation of those loyal to Odin, or embodiments of Odin in one way or another, biding their time, hiding, but standing for what's right. When it came to it, she would not sit and watch a child get hurt or even worse. She just didn't have it in her, because of who she is, in large part because of being Odin's daughter, but also just because she's a genuinely good person. And Denjiro puts his hand on his blade here. Orochi kind of goes mad at this, and Nami and Shinobu, who are kind of spying on on everything that's going on, go in to interfere. They both do. Nami shocks Orochi, and then in what is this beautifully scripted sort of theater, very appropriate for this arc, Denjiro Kyoshido seems to strike down Hiyori. And Orochi's mad at him for obvious reasons, but he says he was giving her a merciful death and what she did merited it, and it helps him retain his mask. So it's a great bit of theater from both of them. The Straw Hats, Robin, Nami, everyone, they help grab Otsuko, Robin cradling her very lovingly, very in a very sort of motherly way, which I really like. And they make their way out of there. And we cut to Big Mom and Chopper, as Chopper is trying to convince Big Mom, in her amnesiac state, to go to the prison to find a bunch of Oshiruko to eat, knowing that Luffy's there. Seeing it as a risk and a gamble, but a worthwhile chance to take to try to free Luffy. Throughout all this, after the Straw Hats have escaped and everything, Brook reveals that there is a poneglyph in Orochi's castle. The news of what's been happening throughout the land spreads, and so the rest of the Straw Hats learn about Komurasaki's death, apparent death, and Law sees that kid has escaped from prison, apparently. Now we then go back with Luffy, who hears about this, and sees that Old Man Hyo is being attacked by the guards, and Luffy goes to defend him. Now, something I want to say about Luffy is that his physique really levels up throughout this. He puts on a lot of muscle, he's toned, he looks strong. This is no longer the skinny captain we know from before. He has built up, and it makes sense given all that he's gone through throughout this adventure, but also this sort of prison segment of the story where he's been put to work. So I like that little change. It makes him seem a little stronger, a little bit more mature, a little older, and I think it's appropriate for his design going forward. It doesn't sort of get away the nature of the carefree nature of his character design, but it adds a layer to it, and I like it. Luffy is in trouble by doing all this. Queen comes into the fray, and Raizo ultimately is able to steal the keys that he's been wanting to steal, and reunites with the eyes in the cell we've been seeing, which is his old comrade, Kawamatsu. Now, Kawamatsu has a fantastic design. He is said to be this Japanese pufferfish man, kind of reminiscent of a kappa. Love the design. And what's notable is that the first thing Kawamatsu says when he recognizes Raizo is Lord Momonosuke alive and well? That sums up their cause, their sentiments, their hope. And Luffy and Old Man Hyo are brought before Queen for judgment. Old Man Hyogoro says, spare this young man. Do whatever you want to me, but spare him. And at the same time, throughout the chapter, Shinobu talks about how the boss, Hyogoro, is an old legend, but he was beloved, he was fearsome. He was the face of Wano's underworld. He had strength and charisma and all that. And while he's well past his prime, you can see that in the way he lives his life. But yeah, back at the prison, he is acting as he seemed to act throughout life. Now, as a trial, Queen puts Luffy and Hyogoro into a sumo match to the death, which is interesting. I heard that the anime really stretched this out, which is funny. In the meantime, it's worth noting that Drake and Hawkins have their men go throughout the Flower Capital to capture anyone who has a moon symbol on their ankle, which is a representation of the Kozuki clan and their gathering momentum and everyone who is devoted to their cause. We then see that the Heart Pirates have been captured, and that Law needs to know because he's not with them. And they could easily be used as bait for him, so he needs to be informed. Now, throughout all this, Zoro has had Shusui stolen, and as this land of tradition, it has been stolen by someone who has returned it to his grave, so to Ryuma's grave, which is a lovely little way to tie this sort of thing together, all the way back from Thriller Bark. So Zoro chases him back to this collection of gravestones where he demands to have it back, and his opponent demands for it to be returned to its proper resting place. And this signals sort of one of my favorite little understated plot lines throughout all of Wano. It's really beautiful, this stuff with Zoro and Ryuma. Gyukimadu is who this person proclaims himself to be. So Zoro is fighting for this Shusui, but then he sees that Toko and Hiyori, both of whom he's not familiar with at this moment, despite the rest of the Straw Hats being familiar with them, which is a cool little element, you know. I just like it. It makes it feel very believable and nuanced and real. They're being chased by the man-killer Kamazo, whose fate is much sadder than we would have initially assumed. And Kamazo's job here is to capture them. He wears these bandages across his face, so we can't really tell his identity for good reason, and he seems extremely dedicated to Orochi. Now, Zoro and him fight. They go through this bout. Zoro, that's beautifully presented. Zoro is pretty seriously wounded, but he ends up defeating Kamazo to protect Hiyori and Toko. So Zoro defeats Kamazo here, but due to the wound, which is like he got impaled through the shoulder, chest-ish area, he blacks out. So Hiyori and Toko take him, look after him, explain what happened, and we get the reveal that Komurasaki is actually Hiyori, Momonosuke's sister. I've been referring to her by name for most of this video because it was pretty obvious all the way back then, and I have the later knowledge, but this is the reveal right here. Meanwhile, Yasui, who is kind of one of the foremost important characters from Ebisu Town, who sort of heads Ebisu Town, that Zoro met earlier, finds the message of the Kozuki clan, takes it, and asks the likes of Shinobu, Kanjuro, I think Nami's there, I think Law's there, if it's time for the final battle, if this signals the fight back. And he's right. Yasu, what another fantastic character. We'll get to him. We then cut back to Hiyori, who's talking to Zoro about how she escaped 20 years prior from all the destruction from Kaido and Orochi, with the help of Kawamatsu, who I don't believe we actually see him at this point, but it's a build-up for Kawamatsu. I mentioned his name earlier, being in the prison, but this is a build-up to when we get the proper introduction for him. So Oda formulates and structures these chapters really, really deliberately to offer a proper build-up for all these characters that get introduced. It's really well done, and I'm sorry, I scuppered it a little bit by talking about future knowledge, but hopefully that doesn't matter much to you. Meanwhile, in the Flower Capital, all those that have been captured with the moon tattoo on their ankle are taken prisoner and displayed in a prison. And we also see the Heart Pirates. We see Beppo. Meanwhile, both Luffy and Hyo fight back against their captors, and Hyo is able to teach Luffy a little bit more about something that he has mastered but Luffy has not, which is called Buso Shoku Haki, a special sort of defense haki. And we get this lovely little moment as he kind of realizes, yo, like, maybe I can teach you something. Maybe I can repay you. And Luffy is just overjoyed. So at this point, we get a bit of background information about Yasui. He's from the Shimotsuki family, which is not connected to the Kozuki clan, but nonetheless, he is absolutely committed to the fight against this oppression, against Kaido, against Orochi, against this injustice and this cage. It turns out that he's Toko's father, and he ended up having to sell her, and yet everyone looks at him as this saint. It was in this sort of section where I noticed that there was a bit of an uneasiness to the way in which people were laughing and smiling. I looked at it as very, very heartwarming when Zoro was there, just as Zoro did, but here I started going like, oh, something might be happening here. And later it gets revealed that something horrible is happening here, in the most disturbing fashion possible, but we'll get to that in a bit. Meanwhile, Hyogoro teaches Luffy how to advance his haki. Caribou and Raizu come into the prison, and Hyogoro is very empowered by the fact that Raizu's there. It makes him believe in his heart that there is hope for this uprising. And in the meantime, Big Mom and the others make their way further and further towards the prison in Udon. Now, Fukuro Kuju, the man with the biggest, most beautiful head in the world, tells Orochi that along with the funeral for Komurasaki, who they believe is dead, they've captured Ushimitsu Kozo, the man at large, and they know his identity. Ushimitsu Kozo, this person, this man who is in direct opposition to this regime, who is a former daimyo, who ends up being Yasui. So a great amount of aura is built up around Yasui as Toko goes towards the flower capital where he is set to be executed, as Toko just cries while laughing, and it becomes very clear what's going on here with the laughter, as Yasu says, "Your pleas will go unheard, my good people. Orochi will not let me go. But first, I have two things for which I need to apologize to you all, and one thing I wish to say to that fool Orochi. And once I have made peace, I intend to go into the great beyond laughing." Genuinely laughing. And then we get to chapter 942, which is absolutely one of the best chapters in Wano. We start this chapter with a flashback where Yasui, 25 years prior, is essentially doing a lot of the jobs that should be tasked to someone with the status and duty of Odin. But he's doing it himself, taking it upon himself, as Odin remarks that he is much better suited to be a shogun than him. We see Odin here, completely cloaked in shadow, just a silhouette, beautiful presentation, as all we have is this charisma that we feel through his words, but nothing about his appearance outside of the silhouette, and this sort of grinning smile that would become a fixture to his character later on. Very clever. And Yasui consistently criticized him for his lack of responsibility, his slacking off, and then he kind of like whacked him, and Odin says, "Don't you realize who I am?" And then Yasui says, "You are no one yet, but he would become someone." What a great establishment for the visual of Odin, kind of, and the flashback, and sort of laying the foundations for what we would learn later. Beautiful stuff. And then we go back to the present where Yasui exclaims that he is not actually Ushimitsu Kozo, that is someone else. I wonder who. But that he used that to get this public platform to be able to exclaim and explain what he wants to explain. And what he essentially does is says that the messages, the half-crescent moon, all of that stuff, it had no meaning. There was no real uprising. That the crescent moon had no meaning, and that these people were wrongfully detained for reasons that were not true. That he was just doing all this because he was frustrated because of his defeat. And in one action, beautifully done, so intelligent and so pragmatic, he completely diverts the suspicions of what the actual plan is elsewhere. He has everyone confused, all the antagonistic forces confused, Orochi confused about what's actually going on, and this allows the rest of the forces, Kinemon and everyone else, to work under this cloak of darkness, this shroud of darkness, with them kind of taking this inaccurate lead. And through this beautiful bit of intelligence and heart from Yasu, he says, "And now, good people, look upon the beauty of the flower capital, how wondrous a sight Wano is." What he does is allow himself to see what Wano was and what he believes it will become through the efforts of those he trusts. And just visually, spiritually, the core of what Wano is still intact. There are still people working to reclaim their home, to act in the spirit of what Wano is. Despite what Kaido and Orochi have done to it, he still sees it as beautiful, and he has such hope that they will return to those days. And this is built up over generations and generations of heart and connection and compassion. He says, "Can you hear me, Orochi? All you have done to our bountiful forests and fields and rivers and villages is pollute and corrupt them with your sludge and greed. You are nothing but a vermin." He calls him a coward. And then he says, with his last words, that Orochi will never be able to devour Odin. He alludes to his pettiness, to his inferiority complex, to all the jealousy and how small a man he really is, and that he will never be able to eclipse Odin because Odin lives and breathes in the citizens of everyone who inherits his will today. Orochi has made no such connections. And Yasu says no one's been able to take Kaido's head, as interestingly, Oda shows us Zoro in the crowd. Interesting touch. I don't think that Zoro's gonna kill Kaido, but I do think that he has a role to play. And he goes out singing. He says, he thinks to himself, "Forgive me, Otoko. Forgive your father for leaving you behind." As Otoko screams for her father and cries but cannot actually fully properly cry because she's forced to laugh. As Zoro realizes what's going on, and Kiku explains that all these people, they can't show when they're sad or suffering because they've been tainted with the smile fruit. This is one of the darkest, most horrific things I've seen in One Piece, as Toko looks at her father being executed here and cannot do anything but laugh. The citizens can't do anything but laugh. It is horrific, and just further emphasizes the cause that they are fighting for, how deeply this oppression is rooted, how cruel and inhumane it is, even more so than we immediately thought, and essentially just props up Orochi as even more despicable. So we learn here that 1 in 10 smile fruits actually do what they're supposed to do and cause the transformation. But the other ones force the ones who consume them to laugh and smile and not express negative emotion. Orochi then took the leftovers of the food that he knew the people of Ebisu Town would eat up and put the remnants of the smile fruits in there, which caused this. Orochi sees Toko, recognizing her, and goes to execute her as well. This sick, But then, for the first time in ages, it feels like, Zoro and Sanji together in one of my favorite images of the entire arc go to defend her. The monster duo is back together. And of course, true to who they are, they see each other and sort of immediately drum up this friendly competition, or unfriendly competition, whatever you want to call it, once again. It's beautiful to see them together. It has been a while, and I can imagine for you guys reading week to week, just like it was for the reunion of Luffy and Zoro, this must have been so gratifying. So the Straw Hats all sort of come together and fight off the forces. They retrieve Yasu's body. Orochi, the coward that he is, retreats. And then in Udon, back at the prison, Kid is captured again, and he's brought back. And we see that what actually was the case is that Killer, Kid's comrade, has been transformed into Kamazo, this almost zealot-like, laughing, brainwashed subject of Orochi, who we saw earlier that fought against Zoro. And this is the most substantial bit of writing for Kid we get, as he wonders what was done to Killer, as he laments and almost grieves for his friend and who he's become, this laughing shell of the person he used to be, but importantly, with tears streaming down his face, very reminiscent of Toko. And Kid is enraged, and Luffy looks on as the two are subjected to this torture from Queen. And Queen says, "You're all going to die one by one." And Luffy says, "The only one who will get to decide where I'll die is me." And just as he says that, Big Mom enters the fray. Meanwhile, in this beautiful collaboration from the Straw Hats, again, working for the people, working to liberate those they care about for what they believe is right, they save Toko, they protect her, they save Hiyori, they fight off Orochi's forces. Notably, Page 1 says to Sanji that, "You've got that Vin Smoke bloodline, eh?" And Sanji says, "Don't you dare say that," which is an interesting in conjunction with what he did before, where he sort of embraced who he was, there's avoidance again. So it's not a clear linear path. There are regressions and progressions, and it's very human the way he interacts with his name and his blood. Meanwhile, Hawkins confronts Law, saying that if Law defeats him, Law's subordinates, Beppo and the like, will die themselves. Meanwhile, throughout all of this, essentially Kinemon and Inu set up this sort of ploy with burning some trees to get Ashida's attention and to get him to join their cause. Through this, he apologizes for doing this. He also gives some perspective, because I was complimenting earlier Oda's use of perspective throughout Wano, how everyone has different perspectives with regards to what they've experienced. Some have gone through 20 years and are not willing to drop everything to join a cause that they might have lost some hope for, or might have been skeptical about. Kinemon acknowledges this here, which I love. It shows great growth. It shows why Kinemon's one of the premier characters of Wano, and it shows this understanding and perspective, and he kind of considers it. Kinemon begs him to join their cause, especially after Yasu did what he did to divert attention. And then Ashida says, "Follow me, I have to show you something." Meanwhile, looking for food, Big Mom and Queen begin their fight at the prison. Big Mom makes short work of Queen, kind of destroys him. As a result of this, Kawamatsu's prison door is destroyed so he can leave. Kid and Killer are freed. Big Mom looks for the food and Luffy says that he ate it, which causes Big Mom to fly into a rage. Meanwhile, Luffy fights with Big Mom and uses this fight as a way to sort of, put the training into practice that he got from Hyogoro. It's worth noting that Raizo and Caribou throughout all of this, specifically Caribou, because I do tend to slander him here and there, they're doing some pretty good stuff behind the scenes. They're sort of mixing up the communications, making tons of confusion for the enemy. It's good. I gotta give him his flowers for that. But this chapter ends with Luffy saying, "Come at me, Emperor of the Sea." The fight between Luffy and Big Mom here, as he tries to sort of enact what he's learned, it's a little dicey. To stop this rampage, Queen then transforms into his Brachiosaurus form, and he drops down, sort of dive bombs onto Big Mom, smashes her in the head, which causes her to get her memories back. Luckily, she immediately passes out, but that is the end of the amnesia arc. Like I said, pretty clunky, pretty contrived and heavy-handed, and doesn't feel very organic, but the positives that came out of it sort of balance it out, so I don't really have a problem with it. I think it's fine. Now, Queen takes control of capturing Big Mom and transferring her to Onigashima. Meanwhile, he puts Babanuki in charge of the prison, but Luffy challenges the rest of the Beast Pirates. He wants to take complete control of this, and he says to everyone that he has always been free. Lovely Luffy moment, very simple, but an encapsulation of who he is and why he's essential to Wano. He's always been free, and he will gather people up in his storm like always, fight for their freedom, show them how to fight, and all in all, just benefit everyone. Now, what is beautiful that happens here is there is an element of conditioning, of learned helplessness from the prisoners who, despite being against the Beast Pirates, against Kaido and Orochi's rule, don't have any hope that they're going to be able to escape this. So they attack him to stop him from making things worse for them because they don't believe that they have any hope in this world. And they are, I think this is a very necessary perspective as well. They are sort of the flip side of those who are able to, no matter what, hope across 20 years. Not everyone's able to do that, and you cannot blame these people for feeling this way. However, as Luffy tends to, he and those he gathers to his side gathers these people to his side as well. As Raizo, Kawamatsu, who has this beautiful, wondrous spread, and also who reminds me a little bit of Frog from Chrono Trigger, if you know what I mean. Not just in design, but in role and sort of dialect as well a little bit. And then Hyogoro sees them, and there's this reunion, and Kiku's here as well. And there's this great spread as we have Luffy, Hyogoro, Kawamatsu, Kiku, and Raizo all sort of back to back, ready to take on all comers. Amazing spread. And Chopper's here as well, of course, because he came with Big Mom. And someone describes Kiku as the most handsome swordsman of Wano, Kiku Nojo of the Fallen Snow. And Chopper goes, "Whoa, you're a man?" And Kiku says, "This one is a woman at heart." And they just move on, and they go, "Oh, okay." And that's it. With such beautiful trans representation, Kiku simply says, "I'm a woman at heart. I'm a woman. I'm not a man." And Luffy and Chopper kind of are interested in this, and they go, oh, okay, cool. And they just move on. It's so casual. It's so simple. It's so... attention isn't drawn to it. It's like, oh, okay, cool. If that's who you are, that's who you are, and we'll move on. And they do. And it's beautiful. It's such, I think, really great trans representation here. And that's very encouraging considering the way that I think it's been a little bit spotty in the past from Oda. But this is beautiful, beautiful stuff. Kiku's a great character, and I love this aspect to her. So the prisoners that they're trying to bring into their forces get shot with this disease, this virus in a bullet called mummy. It's this horrific disease that these people have been infected with, and these people are subjugated and used in this way and ordered to attack and stop Luffy and Chopper and Kiku and everyone else. And they, in this learned helplessness, in the midst of this disease, they are just like, you have cursed us. Why can you not just let this be? Can't you see that it's impossible? It is futile. Witness this futility. This is what they tell Luffy. And Luffy just gets angrier and angrier. And despite Kiku telling him that you cannot touch them or else you'll be infected too, Luffy grabs a bunch of them and says, stop. He becomes infected. The disease sprouts all over him. And he says, nonetheless, you call this overwhelming power? This stuff has no effect on me. And he essentially says, look at yourselves. Look at yourselves. Open your eyes. You are nothing but slaves. You can do this. You can overpower this. You just need to believe. And I don't think Luffy tries to bypass or dismiss their years of suffering and why they've come to think this way, but they need to remember who they were, what Wano once was, what they believe Wano should be again. And Luffy says, you're nothing but slaves, open your eyes. He says, why can't an outsider help protect your country? He says, I made a promise with a friend named Tama who fed me back in Kuri. I promised to make this a place where you can eat your fill again. And Oda devilishly, but so effectively, shows us this barren wasteland, these toxic industrial fumes all over the wasteland. We see a skull in the foreground. And Tama watches on as Luffy proclaims this, going, big bro. Notably, Momo looks on as well. Luffy says he heard about Odin. He knows what he stands for. He was a great man, but he's gone. And so they must fight back against Kaido and take back their home. This has not just become something he's helping other people to do. This has become his fervent desire. Luffy is not thinking about the One Piece. He's not thinking about becoming the king of the pirates. Right now, what he wants most is to free this land from Kaido's rule. It is what he wants most in his heart. Because the people he cares for live here, because he can't stand for this caged oppression. And this is just who he is. We came here to fight Kaido and win. So make up your minds, are you with us or Kaido? It's very simple. And then using his foresight, very great tie-in to Whole Cake Island, Luffy ties up Babanuki's elephant trunk, knowing that he was about to send this explosive round to Luffy, causing him to blow up. Amazingly illustrated. And he points and says, you get the rest. And the prisoners cannot help but be enchanted and drawn to him. And they decide they'll fight with him. Hyogoro is proud, Kawamatsu is proud to see that they are allied with someone of this stature. He has come so far. So as this sort of embodiment of heart and rage, which I love for Kid, he and Killer go out to find the rest of their crewmates. And just to be clear, like, I am not for a second thinking that Kid is this good guy. He has done horrific things, but it's this sort of element where now there's bits of humanity added to him, which adds layers, which enriches the character, which makes me connect with him more. So I really like that Oda did this. Meanwhile, Tama and Chopper and Momo are behind the scenes as Luffy is very close to dying, it seems like, but Chopper heals him up. The crowd of prisoners here, or former prisoners here, are out there, and they're waiting for their prince, their shogun. And in one of my favorite scenes in Wano so far, Luffy pushes Momo out into the crowd, and everyone says, it is good to see you alive and well. They all bow down to him in this beautiful spread, because he is an embodiment, a personification of their hopes and what they're fighting for. He is what they've been waiting for. He is what empowers them. He is this representation of Odin. He is this generation's Odin. But more than that, he is himself, and he is okay. And that is what gives them the encouragement to keep going. And he explains everything to them. And it's beautiful. I really do think that Momo could be one of the most important characters in this entire arc, and the way that Luffy pushes him to accept this responsibility while comforting him and offering guidance and maturity, it has the potential of one of the best dynamics in the whole series. Meanwhile, in a scene that was even better in the anime, but nonetheless beautiful in the manga as well, Ashura shows Kinemon and Inu, all the people that have died in the ensuing years. Those who were not able to wait that long. Understandably, Ashura consistently told them to hold strong, that Momonosuke would come back, Kinemon would come back, but they just could not hang in there. It was too painful. They were wasting away. And with this cry, this war cry of Tsunachi, they would depart for Onigashima to their deaths, as Ashura looked on, begging them not to go because they were marching to their death. There was no way they would win, but they just couldn't bear it any longer. And he bears their souls on his shoulders. He feels it. That is so heavy on his soul, and that is a big part of his hesitance and his inability to go full throttle right away, to jump in. Ashura is hurt, but what he says is that we are 20 years stronger, and there are so many of us left ready to fight for the souls of those who have passed, and we carry them with us. And how better to do them honor than by winning? So he joins their cause. It's beautiful. It's beautiful establishment for Ashura as a character. It makes him one of my favorite scabbards. Meanwhile, Zoro and Hiyori are on their own in a forest on the outskirts, and Law has been captured by Hawkins, who says that you're gonna spill all the details of what you know. And Law has this smirk. Now, I've heard that when people read this weekly, some people thought that he was about to betray. But to me, that is crazy. Like, what I see here is a man who is, in no sense of the word, going to betray anything. He is smiling because he just is kind of smirking and mocking the futility of what Hawkins is trying to do. There is no way you'll get this out of me. But the three who were captured, Beppo, Penguin, and Shachi, were released for Law to be captured. So that was the logic there for him. And then to go back with Law for a second, he told his crewmates after they were freed to not tell the Straw Hats that he was captured, because he's got some sort of plan cooking up. Meanwhile, Kanjiro is given Yasu's remains to respect and bury in Kuri. Oh boy. And there's a lot of sort of rejigging of positions, as the Straw Hats sort of understand where to go forward from here. A lot of them are at large, knowing who they're allied with. Everyone's sort of gathering together. It's this gathering of allies in a really beautiful way. Again, for this common cause, for this spirit, for this sentiment, for all that they're fighting for this freedom, for this home. The source of which all being this yearning. Frankie has to repair this ship that they're going to use. Ashura provides the ship. The Straw Hats all have their own respective tasks. They're gathering more and more support with this being done because of what Yasu was able to do for them. Like I said, it's this accumulation of so many different wills and motivations and strengths of so many different people. Without any single one of them, this wouldn't be able to be done, but with them all, they are so strong together. It's beautiful. Meanwhile, Lin, Big Mom, goes to confront Kaido. We learn that they were once in the same crew. They confront each other and then strike blows. They start to exchange blows, which causes this huge, this sort of thunder crack that seems to split the atmosphere, very similar to Shanks and Whitebeard, as only two emperors could do. And those all around them say, we got to evacuate. They are going to destroy this place. And it just ends there with you wondering, what the hell is this going to lead to? How are the antagonists going to work out in this arc? How's it going to shake up? At this point in the story, around chapter 950 to 955 or so, there's a lot of rejigging of positions and understanding exactly where Oda is going to put all the characters and how things are going to settle before letting the story play out. But it's all done in a really engaging, focused, efficient way. So at the prison, things are being done as well. Tama tames Babanuki and uses him to report to King that everything's alright at the prison, so Udon is under their control, all's good. Luffy is cured, and all those who were infected were cured of the mummy disease by Chopper. Big Mom and Kaido continue to fight all through the night. Hyogoro sees these Yakuza bosses who seem to be pretty inconsequential in terms of their actual characterization. Obviously, they have plot significance, but he's reintroduced to these Yakuza bosses of the current era, which is important for the gaining momentum and influence and power in the plans going forward. At the same time, Zoro and Hiyori are traveling. They find Yukimaru again, and Zoro fights him, but then Kawamatsu comes in, and we see that Hiyori, after the disappearance of her family, of her brother, of her father, of her mother, Kawamatsu took her in and raised her, and they have this beautiful connection as they tearfully reunite. And Yukimaru and these beast pirates come, and they fight them off together, and Yukimaru realizes who Kawamatsu is and says, "Master Kawamatsu, I'm so glad you're alive and well." It reminds me a little bit of Raizo is alive and well from Zou. Again, that common sentiment across all these plot points from Wano. It's beautifully done. But once Hiyori left to do her undercover stuff for Kawamatsu, she left Kawamatsu to do her undercover stuff, more central to the plots of Orochi, Kawamatsu would look for her everywhere, but he couldn't find her. And so to punish himself, he came to this place, Bandit's Bridge, to slit his stomach in shame. But here he found a fox named Onimaru, the late daimyo Ushimaru Shimotsuki's fox companion. And to the end of protecting the graves, Onimaru would fend off all these grave robbers who would try to steal the weapons here. And this is very sacred. People of Ringo are born and tied to their katanas. They're gifted this, and it's left as a grave marker when they die. It's very traditional, very respectful. It's tied deeply to the culture. So it's disrespectful to rob any of the graves. And so, in order to maintain that, Onimaru would fight off any grave robbers. And so Onimaru looked at Kawamatsu by these gravestones, thinking that he might have been a robber. So this stopped Kawamatsu from slitting his stomach, and ultimately he decided that these weapons left at the graves were to be used to fight Kaido. That's what would serve the future and the wills of those who have passed more. And Onimaru could not handle this, could not stomach this because of the disrespect. But Kawamatsu ultimately, over time, showed him that there will be a war in the years to come, and they will need all the weapons they can use to fight back against Kaido. And not only that, but it would do just as much, if not more, respect to those who have departed to use their souls in their weapons in this fight to the future, to allow them to contribute in the way they would have wanted to. And so it's this beautiful message of, you know, the best way to respect the traditions and those who have passed is to carry their wills with them into the future, even if it's not the most proper traditional way to do it. The sentiment, rather than the customs themselves, is what is most important here. And it all coalesces with that theme I've been talking about forever in this video, this common cause to reclaim this home. So they need these weapons. They cannot be stolen by thieves. They cannot be left here. They'll be used in the fight. And so Onimaru ultimately understood this, as Kawamatsu, in grief, said, "I may have not been able to protect Lady Hiyori, but I can do this at least." Ultimately, Kawamatsu did this until he was arrested. And in such a beautiful little twist, we see that Yukimaru transforms back into Onimaru. Yukimaru and Onimaru are the same. And just as Onimaru protected the graves prior, Yukimaru is protecting this area to this day. He has not abandoned this spot. He has not moved, loyal to the end for the memories of those from Ringo, but also to Kawamatsu. Zoro is also given an alternate sword in place of Shusui called Enma from Hiyori. Kawamatsu doesn't really love it, but he tolerates it. We learn that Apu is in cahoots with Kaido and has been from the start. And we learn this because Law just makes short work of Hawkins. And as he is leaving, a mystery figure shrouded in darkness seems to approach him. Luffy continues to train under Hyogoro. A lot of the allies who are in this together make this plan to meet at Port Tokage in Udon. That is the final message that Yasu left for them. Now, the numbers, which are sort of more elite soldiers for Kaido, begin gathering in forces, and Apu is there as well. They are gathered in Wano for this fire festival, which is sort of the signal for all these plans to go down. And at Onigashima, after their fight, which lasted forever, Big Mom and Kaido have decided to ally with each other. They plan to take over the entire world, and once that is done, they will fight each other. I guess that's the natural conclusion they reached after not being able to declare a winner. Kind of Elbaf-like, which is kind of interesting, isn't it? Now, Enma is a sword that drains the haki from those who try to use it. It's not able to be used by just any person, and it seems to drain from Zoro, and he's sort of advised that, you know, this is a little bit risky. Would you like a different katana? Because I don't know if it's for you. And Zoro instead looks at it with such desire and grit and determination, saying, I'll take this one. So by the time I'm used to what it does to me, it'll mean that I've gotten that much stronger. It really does seem that Oda is propping up Zoro to be quite important as Wano goes on. It's already easily his most significant arc in terms of his character progression. The days keep ticking down until the raid. There's lots of little, again, juggling of priorities as things get together, gathering of momentum and influence, planning, strategy, training for Zoro, for Momo, for Luffy, and finally, meanwhile, 7 samurai with red scabbards, 1 shinobi, and 1 little lord, set off across the barren ground, crunching like winter frost under their soles. The sun at its zenith burns bright and hot. Despite the lingering clouds, these are not vengeful ghosts come to repay the slaughter of their liege after 20 years. They cast 9 shadows crisp upon the earth, and Otoko is paying respects at Yasu's grave, remembering her father. Carrot and Wanda remember Pedro. Beautiful touch. They erect a grave for Pedro. However, despite this, despite everything gathering for the fire festival, the day of the fire festival, despite all this careful planning and strategy, Kaido has somehow gained some sort of information that has told him of the plan that will happen, that will occur. So he is prepared for what is about to happen. But as the narration says that a battle that will affect the very fate of the world is about to begin, Wano Act 2 ends. And it was a great act. It is pretty much on par with the quality of Act 1 for me. It's a lot of building and transitioning and foundation laying and setting up, but this sort of thing needs to happen for the payoff to occur in a really consistent, efficient, powerful way in Act 3. And not only that, it's really good and engaging the entire way through. Yasu's sacrifice, the story of Kawamatsu and Onimaru, the character work for Momonosuke, for Luffy. There's a lot of mini payoffs throughout this bit, and it expands the world, it gathers momentum as everything gets focused and the foundations are laid for these battles that are about to ensue. A great characterization for Kinemon. Cool stuff for Law. The rest of the Straw Hats all have these moments, and this sort of thing is needed. And, you know, a lot of setup arcs for a lot of stories tend to be, like, a lot of people say, okay, this isn't necessary. It's slower, it isn't as flashy, but it needs to be done so that stuff later happens, right? But a lot of people tend to look at setup arcs as inherently not as good in quality. This mini arc, this Act 2 of Wano, it is a setup arc, but to me, it is just as good in quality. I think of other setup arcs that I love in fiction, the first few hours of The Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess, the Heaven's Arena arc in Hunter x Hunter, the Uprising arc in Attack on Titan, in the manga, a lot of training arcs in Haikyuu. These are all examples of setup arcs, transitionary arcs, mechanical arcs that, you know, of course, they have to do a lot of heavy lifting, but they are also somehow immensely good in quality. As good as the payoff in a lot of cases. And to me, Wano Part 2 or Wano Act 2 can be said in the same breath. It is really good. Act 2 to me reminds me a lot of Sekido. Weird comparison, but maybe not really. There's this long night, but there is this flame of hope. And, you know, these people are gathering into position as they go to try to enact what this flame is going to lead to. They have been waiting forever, and they just have to wait a little bit longer. But it is so gratifying to see it come together. It is this long night. It is poetic. There are all these personal stories dovetailing together. The sentiment of the past carrying forward these wills. It's beautiful. And what I also found interesting is that Yasu's death actually Kinemon was struggling with a lot of the things he was trying to do. He couldn't quite get people to take that jump to join the cause, but Yasu's death and sacrifice was able to allow him to do that, was able to make people make that jump. In a sort of morbid but empowering way, it was kind of necessary. Sacrifices had to be made, and Yasu knew that, and it also ramped up the pace of the arc. I know that some people don't really like it. I get it because set-off isn't as important as payoff, or isn't as attractive as payoff, but to me, I ate this stuff up. I found it really interesting and thrilling and emotional. Lots of great character work. And before ending off the video today, we have just a little bit more to go through, and it is exciting as hell because it is catch up with stuff around the world peace time. And we see this anime episode for this stuff, chapter 956 and all this other stuff, was beautiful. One of my favorite episodes, directed by Megami Ishitani. Beautiful stuff, as we see the influence of Morgan going throughout the land, spreading this news, these narratives. We see Garp as well, just drinking tea with those from Fishman Island. And what's notable about this Morgan stuff is he is doing these narratives in spite of what these world leaders want to do, of what the government is trying to put out there. He is now offering a different perspective. He has changed his tact to wanting to give a different story. He is not beholden to the government. He is putting out there what he wants to put out there. These narratives, the most interesting narrative, he has shifted. But he is not inconsistent because he's always been in service of the greater narrative. Hundreds of chapters ago, it was in service of what would make things more interesting, which would be the world government and what they desire. But now, that has stimulated this uprising, which he finds more interesting. The likes of Luffy, the likes of the Supernova, the Straw Hats. And we see that the news is that the warlord system has been abolished. Fujitora got what he wanted, as we see Garp and Neptune and Shirahoshi talking about this news as well. So we see that the 7 warlord system has been abolished, but it wasn't due necessarily directly to the influence of Fujitora, but 2 kings in particular, Riku and Cobra. How beautiful. But this naturally affects lots of people, and Buggy, who has recently made a warlord, is now just a pirate again. So, in spite of this, in the face of this, in this sort of struggler way, this perseverance, very similar to Luffy, but just in a different complexion or a different direction, Buggy will fight for his right to exist. He gathers all these people around him and says, we're gonna fight, and then he says, and in the meantime, I gotta skedaddle. That's my king. I love seeing Buggy in these sequences. It's so small, but I'm sure we're gonna get more later down the line, and for now, these little glimpses are more than enough to keep me satiated. Meanwhile, Mihawk feels this thrill at being just a pirate again. Boa, despite losing the influence that will keep Amazon Lily safe, says, don't worry. The reason we were given these positions in the first place is because we're strong. We are strong, so we will defend this. Meanwhile, Weevil is taking on a bunch of government marines, which is interesting. Weevil seems to be a factor, and we learn apparently that something horrible has happened to Sabo. He seems to have apparently died, as those in the Revolutionary Army, and Dadan and Makino and Sabo's brother all react in different ways to this news. I don't believe it for a second, but it's interesting how this is being shown throughout the world, throughout the land. Meanwhile, Doflamingo, just in his prison, learning about the actual news and what's going on in the world, just laughs. Oh, he's such a jester. And Blackbeard gears up to take a prize. And we see that Kobe and Drake are in communications, where Drake is giving Kobe information about what's going on at Wano. So interesting. So many connections. It just sprawls outwards more and more and more the more you dig into it. It's so... Oh, these chapters are so good. Meanwhile, Akainu and Fujitora talk about the abolishment of the warlord system. They have this really great dynamic. And they talk about Big Mom and Kaido forming this alliance. And they say, oh my word, this could be the return of Rocks. Interesting little thing to stick a pin in. And we get a huge amount of exposition from Sengoku, who explains what the Rocks pirates were, which gives more detail about what was alluded to earlier. The Rocks pirates were a crew captained by Rocks, a man named Rocks, who had on his crew Big Mom, Whitebeard, and Kaido, 3 of the emperors. And all these, it was a crew of reputable people who went out to carve out a name for themselves. Other people, the Golden Lion, the Silver Axe, Captain John, all these other people that were named. And the ambition of their captain Rox was to be king of the world. They were hostile against the government, but the government covered up a lot of their deeds. Then there was a fateful event 38 years ago at God Valley. The Rox pirates were wiped out here, according to the news reports. That is so important, because there's a speech bubble here that says, according to the news reports, the Rox pirate crew was wiped out at God Valley. According to the news reports, Garp was named a naval hero after taking down the Rox pirates. I don't believe this, because it says according to the news reports, and we've just seen firsthand throughout 900 plus chapters about how these news reports, very much done at the whims of, in particular, Morgans, but those who have narratives. According to the news reports, for a story that is so focused on telling us the flimsiness of narratives, there is more to this story of Garp being called a naval hero because he wiped out the Rox pirates. There is more to it. I don't believe that that's what happened. At least not in entirety. And especially, Garp does not like talking about this to anyone. He is very secretive about this part of his life. That just lends more credence to the idea that there is more to this story. But it was said that to defeat these people, Garp teamed up with Roger. He always hated being under the Celestial Dragons, and he always refused being under their command. But here, he teamed up with a pirate to protect them. It's no secret that he doesn't like the Celestial Dragons, and only his achievements prevented him from being taken in for insubordination, for teaming up with Roger. So that's apparently the God Valley incident. There is more to it, I'm sure. That'll be revealed in the future, but it's so exciting. It's so exciting for Garp, for Roger, for the Rox pirates, for the lore of the setting. It's great stuff. But this also brought something forth that makes me theorize. Rox is said to be a D. His full name was Rox D. Zebek, and he was enough of a man to lead forth 3 emperors. He was a fearsome pirate. He and Roger would always trade blows. And so you think about this generation compared to the last generation. I compared Luffy to this generation's Roger in a lot of ways. I compared Momo to this generation's Odin. In different ways, but similar sort of spirit. If we're talking about who is this generation's Rox, a few names came to mind. Buggy, but there are a few reasons why I don't think it's Buggy. There isn't the parallel of the D. Also, Rox and Roger were said to be sort of kindred spirits, but very yin and yang. Like, they were eternal rivals, always clashing, although they could see the world the same way in a few ways. Now, who in the story can see the world in the same way as Luffy in a lot of ways, but may just look at the One Piece and the idea of the detours in the journey as different? Who seems much more fated to clash with Luffy, rather than being a sort of ally in some ways, a reluctant ally, an antagonist in some others. Buggy and Luffy's dynamic is not purely antagonistic in that way, and they're very similar, but not in terms of the sort of kinship they share. They're very similar in the way that they gather others to their cause, the way that they're the storm, but not necessarily in the way they view the world. But who is, and who is also a D, is Marshall D. Teach, Blackbeard. I think Blackbeard is this generation's Rox, and I'm gonna hold strong to that until I'm told otherwise. But that really keys you into the idea that Luffy and Blackbeard, they will come to blows. We knew this already, I'm sure, but this just adds more depth and richness to it. Then we get a bunch of bounties. Marshall D. Teach gets 2.247 billion berries. Shanks gets a little over 4 million berries, Big Mom gets almost 4.4 million berries, and Kaido gets 4.6 million berries. Makes sense. I don't really know how to power scale bounties. It feels a bit weird to me that Shanks is lower than Big Mom, but I don't think that's a problem. It just felt weird because I know Shanks intimately. This is how the story, I think I'm supposed to feel this discrepancy. Also, Shanks is younger, right? He's newer to it. Big Mom has years and years of stature and influence and power. So it makes sense. It just feels weird to me to read that. And then they brought up some old bounties. Whitebeard's was a little over 5 billion. Roger's was 5.5 billion. But it's interesting because they don't show us Rox's bounty. They were going through bounties of pirates of the past. Why not show us that? I don't know. It's something that's in the back of my mind. And then at the end of it, they mention someone named Kozuki Odin. This name that gathers this richness and seems steeped in such energy and spirit and richness. Beautiful, beautiful stuff. And it's a beautiful lead in to the beginning of what I consider to be maybe the best flashback in the series. Probably the best flashback in the series. I think it is. And we get just a hint of it. We see Odin, again, just a silhouette of his, drinking sake, steeped in shadow. We see a young Buggy and Shanks. We see a young Rayleigh. So we see here that Roger, Shanks, Buggy, Rayleigh, Odin, the younger versions of people who were gathered together with Odin. This flashback is going to cover these people. As we see throughout the land, Act 3 beginning, the fire festival is starting. And what is said in the flashback as it intersplices with these visuals is, I shall work with my excellent vassals that I left back home to open the land of Wano and wait for a future in 20 years from now. Odin proclaims this to all these celebrating with him. And Roger says, let's do it, Odin. And he says, we shall, Roger. One of the best dynamics in the whole series, Odin and Roger. We will talk about it next time, but we get a bit of an introduction here. And then we see the Fire Festival is in full swing as Wano Act 3 begins. This is Odin saying this to Roger after they part ways after they had gone to Laftel. But the Fire Festival is in earnest. Otochi is taking part in the revelry. People are dancing. The atmosphere is just to die for. Beautiful. The color version, oh, it transmits this feeling of vibrancy and culture and spirit. It feels like I'm there. Wano is built for color. And just as this happens, the 9 scabbards, the Akazaya 9, reach the port, Tokage. However, they were supposed to meet with the Straw Hats. They were supposed to meet here. And we know that Otochi got some sort of message that was going to happen. And so we know something bad is afoot. But they don't know what exactly. They just know something is wrong. What caused this information to be leaked to Otochi? What caused the Straw Hats to not be able to meet them there and everyone else not be able to meet them there? We will talk about it next video, but what a great hook into the next part of this arc. And so this ends my first part of this Wano review. I hope you guys enjoyed. Because this is a continuous arc that feels like a story in itself, but nonetheless, I think I would like to at least wait for part 2 of this before giving my character rankings, but let me just say, part of that is because the flashback turned everything upside down. So, for part 2 of this video series, you will see the character rankings, but not for today. And let me just say, what I've seen from Act 3 is magnificent. I cannot wait to talk about it. It is series defining. It is some of the best stuff in the entire series, and it has made me think that Wano could end up being my favorite arc. It has a chance for sure. It is just beyond words, and if you've experienced it, you know what I'm talking about. But for now, we'll end it here. Wano, beautiful arc so far. Not a step wrong, really. Very minor flaws that I don't think are worth noting, really, because my appreciation for it just so surpasses everything else. This story of sentiment and nostalgia and accumulating personal stories that come together in service of this cause, this yearning for this home. Kaido, such an interesting character. Big Mom, this sort of chaos factor. The hints to Odin, the hints to Roger, Momo's growth, Luffy's growth. Zoro has a lot going on. The side characters, Tama, Kiku, and there's more to come. Yasu's sacrifice, what it is all in the service of. The art, this is some of the best art in the entire series. I cannot be more happy with what I've experienced from Wano so far. It has lived up to everything. Despite it not having to be magnificent for me to be satisfied, it has lived up to everything. So, thank you for being a part of the beginning of my Wano journey. We'll see where it goes. I don't know if this series of Wano videos will be 2 or 3 parts. We'll see how it goes. But nonetheless, thank you so much. If you want to follow these streams, where we will continue through Wano into the next arc as well, feel free to follow me on Twitch. You can give me a follow on there, where we read every single chapter as we get close to catching up. And once we catch up, we'll continue to do the same thing. Feel free to join the Patreon, where you can get early access to the next video, which will be Wano Part 2, where I will gush about so many things. If you'd like your comment to be featured in the next video or in 2 videos, just use the hashtag AJPiece to be entered into a pool. You can join the Discord if you'd like to talk about One Piece or anything else, really, with a great community. And yeah, that's about it, guys. Thank you so much for joining me. So far, Wano is shaping up to be one of the best arcs in the series. I have no hesitation in saying that. And I know that it's kind of divisive, but I cannot for the life of me see why, because all I see so far is really great storytelling, great peaks, and we have not even begun to hit the peaks of what this arc is capable of. So I can't wait to see what happens when we get there. I can't wait to talk about it, and I'll see you guys there. Thank you so much again for so many videos, being a part of my journey, for joining into the streams, and it'll continue with the next video with Wano Part 2. Many thanks for watching.